So very excited to be here this morning and tell you the story about MTM and how we started as a family business back in 1995 and grew today to over $1 billion in revenue. And through that process, maintained our family ownership and successfully transitioned to the second generation. I was looking at some statistics for this presentation, and only about 1,300 privately held companies reach $1 billion in revenue. And very few are started by women and run by women. And then yes, Jamie talked about that stat. Only 30% of companies successfully transition from first generation to second generation. And yes, we had the complexity of a blended family. So I'm really excited to share with you our story, some of our ups and downs, and hopefully you learn from my presentation, because it was one of these presentations that I came to that CMA and the team here, all the sponsors put together, where I learned best practices and started my journey working with CMA for over 10 years. So I give a lot of credit to them for our success. And when I reflect, why were we successful? Well, because we established trust and communication. One of Jamie's best quotes that I always repeat is that all arguments and disagreements come from lack of information. And that's something that I try to remember every day. Communication is so critical. Also, working with partners, working with established firms that work with many other family businesses, and believe me, we're all the same. We might have little differences, we might be making a different product, but what we're all dealing with is generally the same issues. So leveraging people who know how to migrate through these things are really critical. And then building a great culture, sustaining that, and having a great team, which I also had a lot of help with from CMA. Assessments is all I have to say. So with that, I'll get started. And just a little background on myself. I have a pretty humble upbringing. My dad was a captain in the Navy. I grew up the very early years of my life living on a Navy base in Chicago, and just loved that experience. I have a lot of affection for the Navy and growing up in such a hardworking, regimented society, basically. And I took a lot of what I learned growing up that way and have carried it forward. But my dad retired from the Navy, and like all good St. Louis women, my mom brought him back here to St. Louis. And we went out to Wentzville because my mom was an entrepreneur. And when she was 21, she and her sister and mom had bought some property and developed a mobile home park. So my dad came back here to manage that, and she opened her CPA practice that she had been on the sides raising a family, and she got to get started running a business. When I was 12, my parents got divorced. So, early on, single parent, my mom raising 3 girls, we had a lot of duties around the house to support her. She was in tax season, and, she was sleeping on a cot some nights. So we were doing a lot of stuff ourselves at home, and it really taught us a great work ethic and responsibility and accountability. And then, high school came, and I knew I wanted to go to a great university, but I couldn't afford it. So I started looking into my options. I applied to the Naval Academy. I had watched Top Gun, and I wanted to fly fast planes, and so that was exciting. And then WashU gave me a really nice competitive offer, and I went to WashU and pursued my biomedical engineering degree. It was that time that Lynn & Peg started the business, and I'll get to that in a second. But I didn't really know what they were doing. I got my degree. I went and worked at the medical school. And then I realized I wasn't probably the right person for research. I didn't have a lot of patience, so I decided business was probably where I should be, and I went back to WashU and got my MBA. And then I'll fast forward to Lynn & Peg. So my dad had gotten remarried by this when I was about a senior, and Peg was one of his high school classmates, and she was widowed, and they reconnected and got married. And she had 3 kids, and I was one of 3. So we were like the Brady Bunch, except she had 2 boys and a girl, and my dad had 3 girls. So she didn't hold up her end of the bargain on the Brady Bunch. But really a great union, great partnership. And they just decided my dad's job at Blue Cross Blue Shield wasn't enough money to support the family, and they really needed to find a business. My dad was still an entrepreneur, and they were looking at things like Blockbuster Video. So luckily, we didn't go down that path, because I probably wouldn't be here today. So Lynn was working for Blue Cross Blue Shield and saw this opportunity that was in an RFP for the state Medicaid program that said, managed care plan must provide transportation. And he's like, managed care doesn't know how to provide transportation. And he said to Peg, this is the business idea we are looking for. But he was the sole breadwinner, so he said to Peg, hey, why don't you research this and figure this out? And Peg, she's very detailed. She's very organized. This is pre-internet, this is pre-Outlook, this is pre-PowerPoint. So she's calling other states, seeing how they manage transportation. She designs a business plan to address the transportation issue. And what the issue is that millions of Americans are medically fragile, they're impoverished, they have cognitive disabilities, they're aging. Transportation is really critical to getting them to their healthcare appointments, and actually beyond healthcare. And things are starting to expand into social and grocery and other services to keep people healthy and happy in their home, and also getting the right medical care and avoiding more expensive ER or delaying care and then having worse healthcare outcomes. So this is a really important need, and it was being solved differently throughout the country, and she was calling everybody and figuring out what the best practice is. And they thought they were just going to buy vehicles, right? That makes sense, and provide transportation. But the issue was they had to cover the whole state of Missouri. So they couldn't afford to buy vehicles and cover the entire state of Missouri. So one of their friends said, well, why are you going to buy vehicles? There's plenty of transportation providers out there. They're just not being managed. And that was really the impetus of our model. So we built a model where we contract with transportation providers, and we hold them accountable to quality standards. So Peg, she put her business plan together. All the managed care companies that had won the state contract, which was not Blue Cross Blue Shield, they did not win, put together a consortium, and she went and she had her flip chart, and they would ask her a question and she would flip and she'd have the answer, and then another question and she'd flip and have the answer. And then other companies got up there, taxi companies, ambulance companies, and they said, how are you going to provide this solution? And they said, well, we're just big, we'll figure it out, just contract with us. Well, lo and behold, Peg, with all her answers, all her thought out processes and procedures, Peg won the business. She was established as a WBE right out of the gate, and MTM, 1995 in September, started. And it started with this building in Lake St. Louis, which is no longer there. It's now a parking lot. And it was one room, and she started the business with her two oldest children. And, it was successful out of the gate. It was, kind of a storybook type success plan. MTM grew rapidly, and why? Well, all these states were providing transportation, but nobody was really managing it. Transportation providers weren't providing high quality services. They were overbilling Medicaid. They didn't serve areas like the inner city or out in rural areas. And so people weren't getting the necessary care, and it was expensive. So fraud, waste, and abuse was rampant throughout the country. Service was poor. So coming in to clients and saying, hey, I'm going to lower your costs and I'm going to improve quality was a pretty easy sell. And there weren't many companies in the space back in 1995. So just to give you kind of an overview of our model so you can understand how we do this, we contract with sedans, wheelchair ambulances, we provide bus passes, we provide mileage reimbursement. We also coordinate meals and lodging when people have to stay in the hospital for treatment or they live far away. We make sure all that goes smoothly so people can focus on getting the care they need and not be stressed when they have things to address like cancer. We screen for eligibility. Are you Medicaid eligible? We make sure the providers were contracting with high quality, background checks, insurance, and then we monitor data and information to give our clients information about their members. A lot of times we know more about the people they're serving than they do. We talk to them, we know where they're going, and so we're a really great source of information. And then ultimately, we're here to save dollars. So like I said, we grew rapidly. You can see by 2005, we were 10 years, 80 million, and then 2015, 400 million, and then just a few years ago, 700 million in revenue. And how did we accomplish that? Well, we knew how to scale. We were aggressive. We took risk. This is a risk-based model. We contract with health plans in a per member per month model, and so we have to have data and information to be able to price that. And we were comfortable taking that risk. Not every mom and pop regional player out there was comfortable doing that. And we adopted technology early. We worked with an AS400 in the beginning. We just retired that finally a few years ago, and now we're on AWS, but we were always using, at the time, cutting edge technology. And with growth, you really have to hang on to your culture. We were hiring people quickly. We had really great values. Peg made sure that we really put the member focus, the rider focus, making sure we're providing high quality service, but also that we were treating our employees with respect and leveraging their expertise. So critical to achieving that growth and maintaining that culture was working with CMA early to assess candidates and make sure that we were hiring the right talent. So our core values are respecting individuals, collaborating to innovate, acting with integrity, aligning with clients, and delivering value. But we're here to talk about succession planning, right? That's the MTM background. So along that journey, around 2003, after I had gotten my MBA and I was working at another local large privately held company, Lynn approached me and said, hey, we're growing really fast. They're about 30 million in revenue at this point, and we're either gonna keep growing or we're gonna sell. And come on and join us. And so my project had just ended, and I knew that they were being successful. I didn't know too much about the business. My dad and I talked frequently about strategy, and I said, why not? I'll take a risk. And I joined in 2003. Peg had just recovered from breast cancer, and she had worked so hard putting this business together. She was sleeping also on a cot at night, some pattern of women working so hard. And I think in some ways, that attributed maybe to her getting sick because she worked so hard. So she really had to step away. She's that kind of person that was either all in or all out. So I showed up, and my dad said, you're gonna get this great rotational program. You're gonna go from finance to operations to client services. And that really didn't happen because we were growing so fast and we were pretty leadership starved. And so people just started coming to me and asking questions. And one of the great pieces of advice I got prior to coming into MTM was understand the data, understand how the company makes money. And that's really what I focused on. And so having a fresh eyes with an engineering background, understanding processes, and having a natural sales proficiency were really the key to my success. And I also love to work in team-based environments. I think that came from the MBA at WashU. Everything we did there was through a team. So very early, we were always working as a team. But I was also really comfortable, probably because of my father and genes, to take risk and have a growth mindset. And we're in Medicaid. It's a high volume, low margin business, and we have fierce competitors. So if you're not growing, you're dying. So we were growing from the outset. So how did we evolve to passing on the second generation? And I'm gonna skip this slide. I'll come back to it. But who were my siblings? What were they doing? How did we get to here? So everybody on this slide worked in the business at some point. at different levels. So I'll start with Peg's kids, the two that started with her in the business, Jason and Angela. They eventually moved, they were here in Lake St. Louis helping Peg. They eventually moved back to Kansas where they were from. Jason kept working with MTM, Angela did not. My sister Natasha was also very involved in the business right from the beginning, but she decided to start her own business, and she runs now a courier business that is also a national successful company. Derek and Gail were the younger kids, and they both worked in the company as well. Derek, he did, just some of the contact center work and network work, the vendor management work, but he ended up moving to Phoenix where he started his own businesses. And Gail helped us with facilities and furniture and as we were growing into new markets. But then Lynn recruited her to go run his wineries that he started at Lake of the Ozarks. So yeah, lots of companies. So if you're looking for, somebody who likes to start businesses, call my dad. Some $1 billion in revenue and some maybe not, but a lot of fun along the road. And then, so I was left at MTM and focused on running the business. And when I joined in 2003, we were at 30 million. By 2005, I had grown it to 80 million. And along those lines, we had lost our major client that we had when we were at 30 million. So we replaced almost 30 million in revenue. So, I was working really hard. My husband was doing a great job helping me raise my two girls. And, I thought it was time to talk to Lynn and Peg about succession planning, maybe getting some equity, an employment agreement. I just had a job. I didn't have anything else. And so I started the conversation. So I've been working here for 5 years. I've had success. I was the CEO at this point. I think it's time that I have appropriate compensation as the CEO. And they were shocked. And they thought because I was going to inherit 1/6 of the company, I should be satisfied with that. And I was not. And I knew that that wasn't right either. And a long time ago, somebody said to me, if you don't have the right incentives in place, if you're not properly compensated, then it sets up things poorly, right? I'm not going to be motivated to grow the company. I'm going to have probably some resentment. I did start companies outside the company. I started a transit company that's now 100 million plus in revenue. So it was starting to set up those, negative outcomes. So I worked with a legal firm and an executive coach. This is pre-meeting CMA, and I was able to negotiate a SARS agreement, stock appreciation right agreement, to get some of the value that I was creating. But then I went to the CMA presentation and I said, okay, I see what the problem is. We're not communicating, we're not meeting formally, we're not sharing information with the entire family. So we had our first meeting with Jamie at a nice location. We were in Mexico. It was really a fun environment. And we had this conversation, and I realized the problem was my parents. They really had a lot of emotion tied with treating these six children the same. They didn't want to say Alaina gets more because they felt like it would make Angela feel bad. And what we learned through that conversation was that the children all supported me. My siblings all supported me and wanted me to be properly compensated for the work I was doing. They knew how hard I was working. And it was a really simple process, but people are afraid to have those conversations. It's really emotional to talk about these things. My parents are conflict avoiders, so they don't want to have those conversations. And when I was doing it one-on-one with them without the help of a third party, it became me as the problem, right? I'm aggressive. I want equity. It's easy to target me to say she's the problem. But when you bring an outside professional entity in that says these things are normal, this is how we do them, it takes away that emotion and that negativity. So over time, Lynn and Peg did gift stock. They did gift me 5%, and all the kids 2.5%. So right at the beginning of the whole estate planning process, I was given more equity. But we were starting to run into an estate tax problem. So this became less about who's getting what and more about how do we address a future tax problem. And that really helped move things in the right direction. We worked with a family law entity that helped us put estate planning process in place. So after the gifting of the stock, Peg then sold stock to Defective Trust with a note because Lynn and Peg hadn't had a payday yet. So we were growing so fast, all the cash was used to grow the company. So this was a way for them to get their payday. And then Peg also sold stock directly to the company, and so then we appreciated. And then down the road, I bought the majority voting, supermajority voting, and I bought equity. So it was a process of not just gifting, but also taking risk and purchasing equity. And that was how we successfully got to second generation taking over the business. And today, Lynn and Peg are no longer shareholders of MTM. But how do we preserve this family? Lynn and Peg did a lot, well, I'll give the credit where credit's due. Peg did a lot of work integrating the family. You know, Peg's my stepmom. She chose me as her successor. I think we could all imagine that creates conflict in somebody's mind, right, around not being your bloodline. So she was fantastic, always bringing us together. They bought a home at Lake of the Ozarks, and we'd all come there. We come there in the summer, and everybody plays together. You know, my dad was always, if the family plays together, they stay together. And so we have a lot of fun. She, coordinates games and gets everybody, just really integrated. She gets a lot of the credit to the success of this family. But now we're making sure that we set up generation 3, third generation, successfully. And how are we going to do that? Once again, we're working with CMA. We're establishing a family council, and we've come up with this plan. We'll have one member from each family in the family council. They have to be at least 25. It can be generation 3. We will have help from CMA, but we have one family member being compensated to be chair and taking the responsibility to really get this going. And we're establishing a family charter with our philosophy on being a shareholder or being an employee if you're in the family business, and also education on the business as G3 comes in. We also, again, we still play together. We do the summer time together, but we also every other year go somewhere nice around Christmas time and have a good time, and it's really important. So what are our rules for G3 entering the business so that we maintain this, meritocracy? That's really why MTMs have been successful, is because we treat it like a business. We do not treat, this to support the family. We treat MTM as a growth company. We don't expect distributions. We do expect dividends, but they're capped and they're managed. And, we're here to support the company. And so when you come into the business, we want you to have 5 years experience outside the company, having been successful at another company for at least 3 years, showing that you're a good employee. And we want you to do that rotation program that I never got to do, because we want you to fully understand the business. The business is large now, and it's complicated. And we want to educate them on our expectations of hard work, being humble. I've read the book, and many of you probably have, The Ideal Team Player by Patrick Lencioni, and it's humble, hungry, and smart being emotionally intelligent. These are the things we want for G3 as they enter in the business. But that's not, to say that we don't respect outside input into our business. We do. We have established an advisory board. We did that with Collaborative Strategies, and we bring in outside experts to help us with our strategic plan and make sure that they're holding us accountable. My whole goal is to set up the company so it can be a generation 3 running it. And I don't know today if one of them will be the CEO. There's no way to know, right? They're too young. Most of them are teenagers or younger. But if we set up a company that has talented team and succession planning throughout the organization, it's going to be less risky to transition the business to G3. It's not just about the CEO succession. It's actually more about the succession within the company and making sure that there's nothing that I do individually that makes sure that the business is successful, that it can run if I get hit by a car. So that is truly how we manage our business. We have the family council, we have the advisory board, and we also have a syndicate, and I'm going to talk about an acquisition we did that we have sitting on our board as representatives. And then we also have our formal audit and compliance committee. So we talk about that we're a family business, but we run ourselves like we're a publicly traded company, that we stand up to outside scrutiny. We're dealing with Medicaid dollars. We're a large business. We have a lot of responsibility to taxpayers, and we take that seriously. So I was telling Dan that, in 2020 when we started this concept of this presentation, that my story has evolved. So, we've completed the succession planning right before COVID. And so then COVID happens, and we don't know what's going to go on with the world. And we just signed up for all this debt, and now we have to pay it off. We had lost a major contract, and I and my husband, we were on the beach in Georgia, and it was shutting down, and we were scared. We were nervous. So we said, should we sell? We're at peak value potentially. We might be going down the hill, right? And pay off this debt, or what? So all our wealth was tied to the business. Lynn and Peg had notes for some of the stock that we bought. So, even their retirement was on the line. And we didn't have a lot of diversification. So what should we do? We're also competing with a publicly traded company with lower overhead, and this is a price-based environment. We're bidding on large contracts through procurement agencies, and lowest price wins. So we either have to grow to be able to be competitive long-term, or should we sell? So we looked at selling. And through that process, we just said, our company's too great to give it away. We've worked so hard to develop our team and our processes and our procedures. We got to look at the playbook, though, how private equity worked. They were going to put debt on the books and make us roll over equity. And I said, well, we're already, holding on to our equity. We just need to sign up for taking real risk and real debt and do acquisitions so we could scale. So we set a goal to reach $2 billion by 2025. We were $600 million in revenue, so pretty lofty goal. But we did it to say, we don't want to keep doing things the same way. We want to completely change. And so we said to ourselves, we're going to hire an M&A team. We hired a director position from a very smart individual that had helped another firm do many, many, many transactions, because we knew we didn't know everything about doing M&A. And we built up our team, and we started identifying targets. And we knew of this competitor, Veo. They actually took the large contract that we had lost. They were starting to take market share, and they were on the market. They were being represented by Wells Fargo. So we put a syndicate together, and we acquired Veo last year. We did it through just regular senior debt and sub-debt. We have a syndicate of multiple banks. We were able to make this happen because we had just gone through that sales process. We had to do a quality of earnings. We had that prepared, so we were ready to present to banks. We had the opportunity, and we closed. And we closed that in August. And we're not done. We have an acquisition that we're working on right now, but we set up guardrails because we want to be successful. We are focusing just on transportation because we want to scale efficiently, and we are making sure that we have a repeatable playbook, because these are big integrations, big projects. So we're completely focused on making sure we serve our customers. That's our job every day, make sure that members get to care on time with no stress. And we're also making sure that we are focused on diversification. I skipped talking about Wanda. I think it was on this slide. Sorry, I got these. Yeah, Wanda. So what we do is provide transportation to people living in their homes to healthcare. But as people age in place and want to age in their home, and after COVID, you can see people don't want to go to long-term care. They want to age at home. So how do we help them do that? We can transport them to where they need to go, but we can also bring services to them. So we're working with partnerships like Instacart to deliver them groceries. We're working with meal providers to bring them meals. We're working with home care companies to provide personal care, and we're also working with firms like Lowe's and Home Depot and others to provide home modifications. So this is a really exciting new product, and we've called it Wanda to give it kind of like that magic wand, but also that, you know, loving, caring person who is going to take care of you in your home. So the idea is to put the network together just like we do for transportation for over 20 million trips a year and connect people to that. And we're launching that product this year in Q3. We've had a lot of success, but it hasn't been without a lot of heartache too. We've struggled sometimes with implementations, going statewide, live with, you know, thousands of trips the next day from zero can be challenging. Moving our product from the AS400 to Amazon Web Services was difficult. We made some mistakes launching new products. We didn't have good, you know, guardrails or processes in place to evaluate whether it was a good idea or not. We just thought, well, we're big and we've been successful, well, we can do it. Well, that's, you know, not the key to success. So we've had trouble sometimes finding the right people, the right talent that fit our culture. We needed capital and sometimes struggled through growth or downturns in the market. We grew fast, so sometimes we didn't have always the right processes identified and we just threw people at it. But we always made sure that, you know, we were professional and that we were looking at things pragmatically, and that really helped us be successful long term. We've had that success because we've maintained our culture. It's the most important thing that we have, you know, humble, work hard, play hard, have fun, treat people with respect. We want to stay private. You know, we looked at selling and all it did was reconfirm that we want to be different. We want to maintain our business for the long term. We have a lot of great examples here. You mentioned Andy Taylor and Enterprise, you know, in St. Louis of companies that have stayed private and grown, and that we can do the same thing. We've also built a professional team. I couldn't be here if I didn't have my team, they're sitting there, or I didn't have my other family, my husband's family who work in the business supporting us. You know, it's all about people and having great people and having great culture. And ultimately providing great customer service. MTM might be the number 2 player in the market, but we're the number 1 when it comes to quality service and meeting our customers' expectations. And finally, always being innovative, always being entrepreneurial and thinking differently and outside the box. That's the foundation of how we got started, and it's still in our genes. So going forward, we want to remain private, raise capital to fund our growth, and reward and incentivize our team. So I was excited this past year to put a stock appreciation rights program in place for the leadership team, because we do believe that this is a meritocracy and everybody helping us to achieve this goal of growth and staying private should be rewarded for that as well, not just the family. So just continuing to be growth-minded and focusing on our outcomes. Thank you.
So, Alaina, talk a little bit about the blended families. All of us have had different experiences with family, some of them good. Mm-hmm. Talk about, if you had to do it over again, is there one thing that you would have done differently to help the families acclimate and get on board?
You know, I think we ended up where we were supposed to get, but it was not probably the easiest path in the beginning. There was a lot of emotion. You know, my father was yelling at me in the boardroom, and you know, I was kind of shocked, honestly, that you know, I was thinking I was doing all this great stuff, right?
Right.
And so, I think, you know, I was so focused on growth, and I was so focused on, you know, the business that I didn't pay attention to the family dynamics in the beginning. You know, I didn't value it. I didn't prioritize it. And, you know, so I didn't do the pre-work. I didn't do the relationship building. I didn't have those meetings where I was sharing the information. I just thought they should be happy with the results, right? I was generating the results, you should just be happy. But, you know, people need care and feeding, and they need to be treated with respect. And that's the root of all relationships, is trust building. If you don't have trust, you have nothing. And that allows for collaboration. When I trust you and you're being fair, even if I'm buying out more stock than you, but you're getting a fair shake, then I'll go along with it, right? It's when you're not treating people fairly that those things break down.
And as you came through that process, did all of your siblings get on board with that, or did some of them resent your success?
You know, I'm just so blessed to have a really supportive family. It could easily not be the way it is, but they're very humble people as well, and they're very respectful and appreciative of what they've gotten from the company, and they're proud. They're proud of the success of the company. So honestly, we didn't.
Yeah, that's impressive. Dan?
Okay, so several family members have come into and then exited the company.
Right.
Oftentimes coming in, the door works pretty well, but sometimes it can be contentious. On the way out, it's more often going to be contentious. So what was the process to bring family members in, and what was the process to reverse the flow and for family members to exit the company?
In the beginning, we were just growing so fast, it would take any able body, you know, so it wasn't too hard to get in the door, right? So, you know, and Lynn and Peg were actually asking the kids to come in to help, right? So the coming in was not the problem. Most exited on their own because they wanted to do something differently, and they didn't have interest in leadership or management. We did have one sibling who was happy with his position, and it was, you know, it wasn't management. And over time, the salary just became inappropriate for the role. And so, you know, over time, we've done multiple, you know, reductions. When we lost that large contract, we had to take action, right? And so, in good faith, I could never ask my team to identify reductions and not address, you know, market incongruities in our own family, right? So we did ask that sibling to either take a pay reduction or to retire. And so he, you know, decided to retire, and we did it gracefully, and we had conversations about it, and we're just honest. And we use, everything we do is around market fairness, and you know, going forward with any family members coming to the business, it would be based on market rates.
So, Alaina, this may be an incorrect assumption, but if it's true that most of the positions go to family members, the top positions, how does your rest of your management team, you know, non-family, how do you deal with that?
We actually don't have any other family in leadership at this point. I'm the sole family in leadership. We recently, my sister, probably about 4 years ago, she was still the CEO of MTM and running her business. And we got into a place where her business was growing so fast, MTM was growing so fast that she had to make a decision, you know, which business did she want to prioritize. And she chose her own because she's 100%, you know, shareholder of that business. And it was very professional. I wouldn't say that didn't have some emotion. It was just kind of sad, right? It wasn't that she felt maligned. It was just this change. And so just being honest about that and having open communication, I think, is important. We're all human, and treating people with respect is really, foundational.
Right.
So there is a note that you have a board and an advisory board and a family council, which are all components of a good governance system. Is there a regular shareholder meeting?
Yes. So what we're doing is we have a quarterly board meeting with the advisory board, and the chair of the family council will sit on that meeting and then take back the information to the family council, and then we have an annual shareholder meeting. So they'll be getting updated quarterly, but then we have a formal shareholder meeting annually.
And Alaina, the environment today for hiring good people is extremely difficult for most of us. How have you been able to attract and retain talent through your normal growth and your acquisitions?
Yeah, it's not that we haven't struggled like every other company in hiring as of late, mostly in our positions for drivers or contact center agents, not so much in our management and leadership areas. We have a remote model, so we're not requiring people to be in the office 5 days a week. It's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. If you're in the St. Louis region, we're already a remote company. We're in 37 states, and we've always hired and attracted talent across the country. So we're comfortable with that model. We do a lot of engagement. We focus extremely on our culture, being collaborative. All the leadership team is approachable. They're just great humans, and people love to work for them. And so it sounds simple, but hiring great people allows you to keep hiring great people, right?
Right.
And
Okay.
we haven't always hired the right person.
Right.
Okay, so let me say we've not always been
That's a given.
successful,
Yeah, that's a
right?
given, right?
And I'll tell you the reasons when we failed. When we didn't listen to Jamie's assessment, number one. Sometimes they come glowing through the assessment, right? And so, but you don't always know until somebody's in the door, right? So what we've tried to do is make sure that we take action quickly, hire slow, fire fast. Because ultimately, if you maintain those people on your team that don't fit your culture, they're changing your culture in a direction you don't want to go. So you can't not address it.
So there's a question about stock ownership. How many shareholders are there now? And how did the G2 obtain the money to buy stock from your parents?
Yeah. So, that's ultimately, there's 6 of us. We're all still 6 shareholders. Peg's children are all equal minority shareholders. My younger sister, Gail, has sold stock over time to invest in her wineries. I'm the majority shareholder, and my sister Natasha is the second largest shareholder, and because she was operating the business. So we structured the buyouts with long-term notes, and so we fund those notes either through dividends or, personal means. And that's part of the reason why, I amassed more ownership, is I had the means to buy more ownership, right? So that's how it worked.
How do you keep the boundaries between business and family dynamics and priorities?
Yeah. Well, we kind of have a rule of no discussion of the the business and family settings. Like when we're there to play, we're there to play. It's kind of hard for my dad. He likes to talk business, and he's following
Right.
me around. And
Right.
sometimes I have to tell him, okay, I need a break, right?
Right.
And he's super lovable and a great guy, so he understands. So we try to do that, but it doesn't mean that sometimes you don't have to have those discussions. My second family's here, and we get together a lot, and we have family dinners on Sunday nights, and they're in the business, and they have opinions, and sometimes I'm open to hearing it, and sometimes I need a break, and they respect that. So we have a good relationship.
A question about your family council. How often does it meet? What do you do at those meetings? And how does that help hold the family in unity?
Well, to be honest, we're just kicking off the family council again. We did it in the beginning to transition to G2, and then, it kind of just fell apart. And then now, because G3 is getting older and they might be coming into the business soon, we said we got to get this back going. So they will meet quarterly. We will ask them to come to St. Louis twice a year in person, and they'll meet for 2-3 hours a day, but they will also, we're asking them to attend the annual board meeting in person as well. What was the second part of your question?
And how does it hold the family? How does it promote family unity?
Well, I think it goes back to that communication piece, transparency into what's going on in the business, and frequent updates, so you're not guessing how the business is doing, right? That you're always informed, and that you feel, even if they're not on the board, the official board, having input and understanding and voicing their concerns or their ambitions or their goals, I think is really important.
So just a quick follow-up. LL Bean had their family council one day, their shareholder meeting,
Yes.
and then their board meeting.
Yes.
So they were all stacked together.
Yes, that's what we plan to do.
Must be good practice.
Yes, that's what we plan to do.
I don't want to use this up as my question, but there was an interesting comment from somebody. Alaina, your shoes are fantastic. Would you mind sharing the brand?
So I found this brand recently, Scanlan Theodore. They're Australian, and they just came to the U.S., and they got really cool stuff.
Thank you. All right, Dan, that wasn't my question.
And thank you.
So many times, it sounds like Peg was super
Yeah.
mature and a visionary in both her assessment of you and the family. But sometimes when parents pass on a business of a certain size to their children, and then the child or children take it to the moon, there's some resentment. Did you see anything like that as you were growing dramatically? I hear your dad is following you around family events with different ideas,
Yeah.
I'm assuming.
Yes.
How did you manage through all that?
Well, there was a point where prior to me buying out the stock, where Lynn was starting all these businesses, and it was on the backs of MTM. And so, at some point I had to get control of that because we needed the cash to grow
Right.
the business. So, it's 20 years of lots of history and lots of stories, but I don't think there was resentment. I think people were just grateful and surprised, right? And Peg finally, Peg and I have it's a matriarch to matriarch relationship. I respect and love her, and she respects and loves me, but she's not my mom. And they got married when I was 18. I didn't even live with her
Right.
at any point, right? So recently, a couple of years ago, we were at the lake, we were on the boat, and she just turned to me and said, I want you to know that you were the right person to be the CEO of MTM. And it was a really great moment.
I bet.
So the observation is made, you are the only member of the fiduciary board, which has the voting power as opposed to the advisory board. Is there any concern in your family about you having a concentration of power?
I would have concern if I was a shareholder. If I wasn't the CEO, right? I think it's fair to say. And I think it's because I've had 20 years of success and trust, and I haven't violated that or given any reason. And they know that everything I do is for the business. Everything I have ever done is to grow the business. And so they trust me with that. Now, for generation succession planning, no, I don't think we will end up there. I think we will expand the fiduciary board. We will invite potentially our CFO and potentially a trustee, so that if something were to happen to Danny and I, let's say traveling, our girls were only 15 and 17, I don't want the business to be sold until in such time that they decide that it needs to happen. So in the meantime, I need to have an independent party helping them if that were to happen.
your appetite for risk has proven to be very successful. Talk a little bit about how you brought along your siblings and G1 to follow your direction.
You know, I think that there are people on our family that aren't comfortable with risk. And they've been really great advisors for me because, you know, I was just totally focused on the top line all the time. And I just knew that if we grew, the bottom line would come, right? But at some point, you know, my husband was working at Anheuser-Busch for 12 years, and I finally got him to come over to the company, and he said, you know, Anheuser-Busch's margins are 40%. And you're working so hard for this.
Right.
Like, what are you doing? And so, you know, it is important to listen to others. And I think that that's a part of the reason why they trust me and don't say, like, you need another person on the board, because I listen to them. And my sister's more conservative, my brother-in-law is more conservative, and they've been really good influences on the business and me personally.
So are you now providing beer to the people you're transporting?
No, that would be a bad.
That'd be
Though Danny's boss, like 15 years ago, said to me, "Can you pick these people up from the bar?" And so he had the idea of Uber way back then.
Right.
I didn't listen.
So Alaina, if I don't ask this question, I might get fired since I no longer own the company. And I have to preface this with, another person and I called on Alaina. We wanted them to use our services. We met at Annie Gunn's. This was about 10 years ago. And in the middle of the conversation, Alaina pulls out her phone, says, I got to make a phone call. She calls somebody and says, we're going to hire somebody for this position. We're going to do a CMA assessment before we hire them. Goodbye. And I thought, okay, shut up and go home. Bring the bill.
Yeah.
So the question is, and if I find out a CMA person asked this, I'm going to have an issue with them. How do you use the assessments?
Yeah.
Because CMA does the assessments. How do you use those to select and develop your people?
Yeah, we do use the CMA assessment for hire decisions. You know, it's an extra data point. I think that's what Jamie always talks. It's not the end-all, be-all. It's not the 100% guarantee, but it's another data point. So we post our position, we screen, and then we get down to our final candidates, and then we do the assessment for that no-go, go decision. But we also make sure one of the keys to success that we've learned is to have multiple interactions with people. So that was another reason why we failed on a hire, is we should have done more interactions. The more you interact with somebody, the more their true self comes out. And so have those interactions and then hire, right? But then don't just put it on the shelf. Use it. So have the meeting with the hiring manager and the individual, go through the assessment. I shared my assessment with my team so that they know where my weaknesses are, so that we can all collaboratively plug those weaknesses, because there's no perfect candidate. There's no perfect person out there. What you're trying to do is put a team like a baseball team together, right? Like, this is a good pitcher and this is a good catcher. But the catcher can't pitch and the pitcher can't catch, right? So we're just here, and that's my job. I'm the general manager. I'm just putting together a team of people with strong attributes, but the fundamental one is that they're collaborative and can work together. And that's how we use the assessments, and we coach and use those, and we pull them out. If we're struggling, I bring them out, and we go through it together and remind ourselves how we need to perform.
Do the non-family leaders of the business, do they play a role in the family council at all, and or the family meetings to help provide business information to those meetings?
Yeah, the non-family members on the leadership team, yes, we're inviting. We have our head of tax, Gina, she's here. She's been really integral in helping us set up this family charter. You know, they obviously have a lot of interaction with her around tax. And then Jill, our CFO, is very involved with the family as well. I mean, time to time, we've bought stock. We've, done different transactions with the family. They trust Gina and Jill implicitly, and they will be coming to the meetings to educate the family council. I'm choosing not to participate in the family council. My husband will be the representative, so that they feel like they can ask questions and not worry about offending me or, for more transparency.
So in my experience, not very many family businesses have an audit committee, but you have one. Can you talk about the composition of that committee, who sits on that, and how that process works, and how the audit committee interfaces with the board or the shareholder meeting or family council?
Yes, so we have internal audit and compliance. So we're dealing with Medicaid funds. We have to be high trust certified, which is a security, of data and information. We have a URAC accreditation, which is around making medical decisions, basically. So we have to be compliant with those. We are audited, so we have to audit ourselves so that we pass audits. So the people on those teams are our head of quality, security, IT, our finance person who's over internal audit from a financial controls perspective, and then representatives from operations, myself. And so we meet quarterly as an audit committee, and then we report to the board annually on our compliance.
So this is not an external audit of your finances specifically, which is, in a public company, that's what an audit committee would be.
We are audited.
I did hear you say you audited
We
your
are.
own, but it's internal people doing the audit.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we have both external audit for our financial statements.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah, so it's, from the very beginning, MTM has had an audit because it's required for the business we do, being in Medicaid. And then we've always had a really robust finance and accounting division. So I think that was one of the things people are always surprised at any level through our growth path when they would come into the business, how sophisticated we were around those financial controls. Not that we can't improve, we're always improving, but we were ahead of the game.
I've seen partnerships in families as they're building a business. They're all kind of pulling together, and nobody's really, because there isn't a lot of money to fight over. Then the business begins to thrive, and the profits begin to multiply, as in your all's case. Has that created more resentment, more challenges when the family members see large piles of cash in the business?
So, I think there's multiple points there, but for so long there was nothing coming from the business. It was just always reinvested, and so now we're to a place where we do pay dividends, but we're also held to a debt covenants and agreements, right? So it's fairly easy right now to manage that going forward because we have a bank agreement that says we can only dividend out, 10% dividends after tax, right?
Right.
So that's what we get to dividend. We did do some, I'll call wealth distributions about 2 years ago. So I think that really helped everybody to get to a certain level. And then, we told them now we're on a growth path, and so don't expect that same level. But that's hard, right? Like,
Right.
If somebody's getting a lot of money and then all of a sudden you tell them, no, you're not getting any
Right.
more. But, they're on board, they understand, and they can tender their stock. So, that's the answer to that. If you want more capital, then you need to tender your stock. So if you're happy with the stock growing, then be happy with the stock growing. I thought I had one more comment on that, but maybe it'll come back to me.
Okay.
So this will be our last question.
Okay.
These are two very short ones. What was the name of the book you mentioned?
Yeah.
And how old were you when you became CEO?
Oh, yeah.
I have no idea who asked
Yeah.
that question,
That's
but
okay.
I think you couldn't have been very old.
No, I came into the business when I was 27, so I was the CEO when I was 29. And then Patrick Lencioni, ideal team player, and the concept is you need people that are humble, which means they're collaborative, hungry, they want to work hard, smart, they're emotionally intelligent. Doesn't mean they have to be a rocket scientist. They just need to be able to read the room, work with people, and be approachable, and work to the common good.
Okay.